Welcome everyone to VTH Extra, whether you're here for the first time or you're coming back, because I haven't made any videos for months now on this channel. But one of my goals for 2024 is to be making regular content for VTH Extra, whether that's my music or me telling more stories or me just doing other original content or the occasional reaction video, which is what I've become known for on vlogging through history. So we're going to do some reactions to some videos that wouldn't really fit on vlogging through history, and this is a great example of that. Top 20 movie deaths that still hurt from WatchMojo. I'll put the link to the original content down in the description. And if you want to see more stuff like this, please let me know if you've got a suggestion to a non-history video you'd like me to react to. If you do put a link, understand I'll have to go in and approve that. So if it doesn't show up right away when you leave the comment, don't worry, it will show up once I have a chance to go and look at the approvals. So I love movies. I talk about movies all the time. And I get very emotional in emotional moments in movies. And I can think of some moments in movies that no matter how many times I watch them, they're going to hit me every single time. So I'm expecting some of them are going to be in this one. So let's go ahead and dive into it.
You know, made you such great dogs. You loved us every day, no matter what.
Welcome to WatchMojo, and today we're counting down
Terminator.
our picks for the top 20 movie deaths that still hurt.
I know now why you cry, but it's something I can never do.
For this list, we're looking at the most tragic film passings
No,
that packed an
not
unforgettable
my
emotional
girl.
punch. We're focusing exclusively on human deaths
Titanic.
from live-action flicks, though. So while Mufasa and Marley's deaths destroyed us, you won't find them here. Plot points will be discussed, so
Green Mile.
beware of spoilers ahead. Which of these deaths are you still reeling from? Let us know in the comments below. Number 20, Lieutenant Nick Goose Bradshaw, Top Gun. Goose and Maverick are the best of pals. The two do practically
And I want to
everything
say up front, what I'm going to do is I'm going to let each one of these play, and then I'll comment at the end of each one.
together, like attending Top Gun and flying past the control tower and spooking their superior. It's the type of brotherly love that is often found in the military.
I'll get a visual ID, Cougar, you hook 'em. Roger, and I'll clean 'em and fry 'em.
But the military is dangerous. The two enter a flat spin during an exercise and eject. And while Maverick makes it to safety, Goose slams into the canopy at high speed. The impact kills him, and Maverick suffers intense survivor's guilt. The reactions to the death are just as upsetting as the event itself, with Maverick and Goose's family grieving in equal measure. His passing and legacy was then made into a major subplot in Top Gun Maverick, resulting in buckets of tears.
Thank you for saving my life. That's what my dad would have done.
Number 19.
Yeah, so I think part of what gives us emotional connections to movies is that we can somehow relate. And depending on where we are in life when we first experience those, it can have a lot of positive or negative impact on that. And so for me, I was a kid when the original Top Gun came out, and while I always enjoyed the movie, I don't know that I ever emotionally connected to Goose's death, and maybe it's just because I was a kid and I couldn't really understand it or relate to it in that way, or because I haven't been in the military, but that one just didn't hit me all that hard, though I know it did for a lot of other people.
Emma Greenway Horton, Terms of Endearment. Deborah Winger received a Best Actress Oscar
Jeff Daniels.
nomination for playing the wickedly sympathetic Emma Greenway Horton. Emma has a fraught but ultimately loving
Look how
relationship
young
with her
Jeff
domineering
Daniels is
mother,
there.
Aurora. And she remains close to Aurora as she goes through painful transitions in her personal life.
And they get wonderful jobs. You can go right across the state to Colorado and have it.
I don't know why I tell you anything. I mean, I seem to like you less and less, Mom.
Not only is she cheated on, but she's eventually diagnosed with cancer at a relatively young age. Her mother is there to support her as she weakens from the sickness and eventually dies, and it all proves unbelievably difficult. It's hard to see a parent losing their child, and the respective performances bring a highly uncomfortable aura of realism to the tragedy. This death may hit a little too close to home for many, but then again, great art often does.
So stupid. Somehow I thought when she finally went, that it would be a relief.
Number 8.
I never saw that movie, so I can't really speak to it too much, but I have a feeling that a number of the entries on this top 20 are going to involve parents losing children, just because, honestly, listen, as a parent, there's no greater fear that you have, and there's nothing that is scarier, and there's nothing I can imagine that would be more devastating as a parent than to lose a child. And I watched my grandfather go through that with my uncle passing away a few years ago, who was really like a brother to me, and it was his youngest. So I can't imagine.
Apollo Creed.
Oh, yeah.
Rocky IV. Rocky IV was easily the goofiest film in the Rocky franchise, eschewing reality in favor of ridiculous Cold War metaphors, a Terminator-esque opponent, and a talking robot. That being said, it still found time for drama, represented by the death of Apollo Creed.
If he dies, he dies.
We watched Apollo grow throughout the Rocky series from cocky villain to mentor, and he eventually became Rocky's closest friend. When Rocky lost Apollo, he lost a part of himself, and the rest of the movie is devoted to exploring his grief and isolation, both physically and mentally.
Because I'm a fighter. That's the way I'm made, Adrian. That's what you married. We can't change what we are.
Rocky was never the same after Apollo's death, and it still hurts to think about. Number 7.
Yeah, that's a fantastic movie. I always thought Rocky IV was my favorite of all of them. There's something to love about each of them, but Apollo's death obviously hits hard. He is the main antagonist of the first two movies. Rocky fights him in the first movie and loses. Fights him in the second movie and barely wins. So it was inevitable that they were going to have to do something to shake things up. And that's what he ends up doing.
17. Shelby Eatonton Latchery, Steel Magnolias. With the help of an iconic cast, Steel Magnolias tells a devastating story about sisterhood and sickness. In one of her earliest roles, Julia Roberts plays Shelby Eatonton Latchery, a young woman with type 1 diabetes.
Your poor body has been through so much. Why would you deliberately do this to yourself?
Diabetics have healthy babies all the time.
You are special, Shelby. There are limits to what you can do.
The character was modeled after the sister of author and screenwriter Robert Harling, who passed away in 1985. Like Harling's sister, Shelby also passes away from the effects of diabetes. The character suffers fatal complications following the birth of her child and an organ transplant. It's a horrendous death that's impossible to be indifferent to. When her family finally decides to take her off life support, there is not a dry eye in the house.
Jackson, you're gonna have to get her pink suit. The one with the little red cherries on the pail.
Number 6.
So again, that's a perfect example of the emotional pull that movies can have, right? They put you in situations that either you've been through, or you know someone who's been through, or it causes you to imagine what it would be like to go through that yourself. And that's one of those that I think everybody can relate to. Not everybody can relate to the death of a fighter pilot like in Top Gun. Everybody can relate to losing a loved one and having to make the decision to pull them off of life support because there's nothing more that can be done for them, and for them to be going through an illness like diabetes or something like that. And so those are always going to have emotional pulls.
16. Jack Twist, Brokeback Mountain. Jack Twist meets Ennis Del Mar on the titular Brokeback Mountain, and it's love at first sight. But there are more than a few problems. This is the 1960s in the prototypically masculine American West, and Ennis and Jack are both cowboys. It's a flurry of obstacles that prevents them from openly embracing each other, and the resulting story is one of complete tragedy.
I wish I knew how to quit you.
After years of on and off hesitant romance, Jack dies in a freak accident while changing a tire. Or, at least, that's what Jack's wife tells Ennis. Ennis believes that he was violently killed. The ambiguity makes it all the more tragic, not only taking away Ennis's true love, but also preventing him from getting any real closure.
He used to say he wanted his ashes scattered on Brokeback Mountain, but I wasn't sure where that was.
Number 15.
So again, that's a movie that for a lot of people they couldn't really connect with because of the nature of it being two gay characters and things like that. But there's, again, something everybody can connect with in this, and everybody can relate to the idea of something that you want but you can't quite have, or that you kind of have an emotional pull in two different directions. Like in this case, these guys are both married, and they're trying to live this masculine family man, husband, father life while simultaneously having this secret they can't tell anybody about, but that means so much to them. And in the end, tragedy takes place. And there's, one of the oldest stories there is of tragedy when it comes to relationships, going all the way back to the beginning of stories. And some of the great stories of all time have had that in common. So it's just a modern telling of those kinds of things.
Maggie Fitzgerald, $1 Million Baby.
This one's tough.
This boxing film from Clint Eastwood makes a major plot detour that comes with incredible emotional power. At first, $1 Million Baby seems like a typical boxing movie about an underprivileged underdog who defeats her personal demons in the ring.
Other truth is, my brother's in prison. My sister cheats on welfare by pretending one of her babies is still alive. My dad is dead, and my mama weighs 312 pounds.
But a freak accident occurs during a title fight, and Maggie breaks her neck on a stool. Unwilling to live with quadriplegia, she asks that her trainer Frankie end her life, and he eventually acquiesces. The hospital sequences are hauntingly performed by Hilary Swank and Clint Eastwood, and the unexpected and controversial ending is a major tonal whiplash from the uplifting material that came before. This whiplash made $1 Million Baby a classic whose ending is still widely referenced to this day.
He gave her a single shot. It was enough adrenaline to do the job a few times over. We didn't want her going through this again.
Number 14.
Again, something that people can relate to. What would I want if I were in her situation? Would I want to be like that? And I think many of us, if we live long enough, we probably express to our loved ones, hey, this is what I would want if this situation happened to me. And I would 100% understand why she felt the way she did. And so there's an immediate emotional connection because we can relate to what it feels like to be in her situation. We can relate to what it could feel like to be in Clint Eastwood's character situation. And I think Clint Eastwood is underrated, especially, as a director, I think everybody knows he's had some great roles as a director, but as an actor too. Everybody thinks of him as the tough guy, but there's an emotional side to him, a vulnerability that can show every so often, and that's a great example of it.
The Terminator. Terminator 2, Judgment Day. James Cameron is a brilliant filmmaker. Not only did he give deep humanity to a killer robot, but he also crafted a touching story about fatherhood through the lens of a sci-fi action epic.
It would always be there, and it would die to protect him.
The Terminator becomes a loving and deeply protective father figure to John, and they share one of the most gut-wrenching goodbyes in the history of cinema. Knowing that he has to die to save the future, the Terminator orders that Sarah lower him into a vat of molten steel. Everything about this scene is legendary, including the music, the respectful handshake between Sarah and the Terminator, and of course, the iconic thumbs up. Hasta la vista indeed. Number 13.
Yeah, that's one of those examples of a sequel that's in many ways better than the original. Terminator 2 was fantastic. And yeah, that, for as emotional as you can get about a robot terminating itself, destroying itself, that's about as emotional as one can get in that kind of a situation. It was really well done. It was crafted well. It's one of James Cameron's best movies that he's ever produced.
Guido Orefice, Life is Beautiful. Roberto Benigni was the first man to win the Best Actor Oscar for a non-English showing, and he did it playing Guido Orefice. Guido is sent to a concentration camp with his young son Josue, but in order to preserve his childish innocence, Guido pretends that it's all a big game.
Comincia il gioco. Chi c'è? Chi non c'è, non c'è. Ihr seid nur aus einem einzigen Grund in dieses Lager transportiert worden? Si vince a 1000 punti. Il primo classificato vince un carro armato, vero?
He maintains the ruse until the very end, even while he's being literally taken to his death. He spots Josue watching and quickly gets back into character, doing a goofy walk for his son before he's killed. We're spared the visual, but that image of his final defiant walk is simply unforgettable. It's an incredible visual metaphor for the challenges and ultimate rewards of fatherhood. Number 12.
There's something about a man maintaining control over what he can in those moments that's powerful. And a lot of people had their dignity, had the control over their lives taken away. And you can crumble under that, which would be perfectly understandable. And I'm not judging anyone for it. Or you can take control back. And that's what that character does. He is taking control over his life in those moments. And he's making something beautiful out of the ugliness of the Holocaust. And that's one of the many reasons why that movie caught people's attention the way that it did. Fantastic stuff.
12. Noah Calhoun and Allie Hamilton. The Notebook. This classic Nicholas Sparks story chronicles the bittersweet lives of Noah Calhoun and Allie Hamilton. It's your classic poor boy rich girl story, but with a twist. The core narrative is being told through flashbacks, and we eventually learn that it's being recounted by the elderly Noah to the now dementia-ridden Allie.
You don't think it'll help?
No, I don't.
She remembers, Doc. I read to her, and she remembers.
Sometime after the tale is complete, Noah joins Allie in bed, and they die together while holding hands. Sure, maybe it's a little sappy, but it's also really beautiful and heart-wrenching, and that ending will forever live rent-free in our collective heads. Dementia is a horrible disease, and The Notebook is one of its defining portrayals in pop culture.
Do you think our love could take us away together?
Number 11.
If you haven't seen that movie, be prepared. It's not your typical sappy love story. It is a powerful look at what far too many families experience. And you can see me tearing up because my family went through that. I was raised by my grandparents, and if you haven't heard those stories, I've got videos on the channel here about that. And 3 days from now is the first anniversary of my grandfather's passing. And in April, it'll be a year since my grandmother passed. My grandmother had Parkinson's and Lewy body dementia. And my grandpa walked her through the 10 years or so that she fought those two diseases, right up until the end. And I'm surprised it took them 4 months apart for them to go, because we knew as soon as one did, the other would too. And there's a powerful scene in that movie where they're having this conversation and everything's great and she knows who he is and all this, and then just something snaps and she instantly has no idea who her husband is, and it's gut-wrenching. And he plays it so beautifully and portrays the horror that a husband feels in that situation. Both actors were tremendous in that. And again, I think it's something anybody who's experienced that with a loved one, especially a parent, can understand, or a spouse.
11. Neil Perry, Dead Poets Society.
This one's brutal too.
With a mature and reserved Robin Williams playing John Keating, Dead Poets Society tells a story about the power of literature and the soul-eating effects of demanding expectations. The latter comes through in the story of Neil Perry. Neil suffers at the hands of his cruel father, who demands absolute perfection and studious obedience from his son.
You're playing the part of the dutiful son. I know this sounds impossible, but you have to talk to him. You have to show him who you are, what your heart is.
The demands weigh heavily on Neil's psyche, especially when he's pulled from the boarding school for getting too attached to acting. Physically and emotionally shattered, Neil proceeds to take his own life. This results in a horrific reaction from his parents, and the scene is flawlessly performed by Kurtwood Smith and Carla Belver. This sequence cuts right to the heart and is realistic enough to chill your blood.
No, oh, my son!
He's all
my
right.
son, my poor son!
He's all right! He's all right! He's all right! He's all right! He's all right!
Number 10.
Again, if you're a parent, nothing more horrifying than to imagine. And as much as that was his fault in that moment, it was his little boy who had taken his own life. And that is a phenomenal movie. It's one of those, if you were to make a list of movies everybody should see, Dead Poet Society is one of those movies. You'll hear references to it. The quoting of, "Oh, Captain, my Captain, our fearful trip is done," and Seize the Day, Carpe Diem, that thing. But Robin Williams, for the comedic genius that he had, some of his most brilliant roles are the serious ones that he was a part of. And that's one of the most top-notch films he was ever a part of. Great cast, great story, a lot to relate to. And this next one would be my daughter's probably number one on her list.
Sirius Black, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Poor Harry Potter. He finally gets a loving family member in his godfather, Sirius Black, only for him to be ripped away at the hands of Bellatrix Lestrange. Sirius's end comes in the climactic battle at the Ministry of Magic, when Bellatrix hits him with the killing curse. The curse takes effect, and Sirius dies before we even know what happened. The confusion only adds to the tragedy, as we, like Harry, enter a state of shock. We don't want to believe it, but he is indeed actually dead, and our hearts are left broken. But the pain wasn't over, as we were then forced to watch the deaths of both Dumbledore and Dobby in subsequent films.
And Snape.
Not over them either.
Oh, Dobby's, that was tough. That was a sad one.
His friend.
Ugh.
Harry Potter.
Number 9.
So, yeah, if you're not into Harry Potter, if you've never seen it, Harry is orphaned as a baby when both of his parents are killed, and he's raised by an aunt and uncle, especially the uncle, who are cruel to him. They lock him in a room under the stairs. They treat him like utter crap his whole life growing up. And then he finally, as a teenager, Sirius Black comes into his life, who's his godfather and was like a best friend to his parents. And he finally has that father figure. He finally has family, only to lose him again. And so that's why there's so much emotion to that, is because of the cost that Harry experiences in that loss. And again, that's something we can relate to. We can relate to situations where we've gone through so much and finally things are in a good place, and then somebody pulls the rug out from under us and it's not a good place anymore. And I think that's what makes that emotional.
Wolverine, Logan. Logan served as a bookend of sorts for the superhero genre. X-Men basically kickstarted the movement, and Logan closed a chapter in its history. It was as much a superhero story as it was a comment on the genre itself, which grew up, became hardened, and eventually passed the baton to a new generation.
Take your friends and run.
Logan's death served as both this metaphorical baton passing and the culmination of nearly 20 years worth of superhero stories and character work.
What do they call you? Wheels? This is the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
This movie showed us an aging superhero well past his prime and resigned to his tragic fate, and it made for some pretty bleak viewing.
Still have time. Charles, the world is not the same as it was.
People literally grew up with Hugh Jackman's Wolverine.
Yeah, that's true.
It was incredibly tough to see him go. Number 8.
All right, so here's what I'll say about that one. Yes, it's true that that could be emotional for a lot of people, but for me personally, it's one of those situations where I think I have a harder time relating to the deaths of characters in a world that's more of a fantasy world. I can much more relate to deaths in a movie like Titanic or in the Holocaust or in a real life situation than I can a mutant in the X-Men world. That's not true for everybody, and I'm not passing judgment on people for whom that is a big deal. It just wasn't that way for me.
Jack Dawson, Titanic. Spoiler alert, the Titanic sinks. We all knew that going in, so we all figured that one of the two main characters would die. But that didn't make Jack's death any less despairing.
I will never let go, Jack.
Maybe it's the way he dies. He continues to protect Rose until the very end, sacrificing himself so Rose can lay on the drifting door. We're then forced to watch him freeze to death. And let us tell you, that did not make for easy viewing.
There's a boat, Jack.
By the end, we're left listening to Rose's desperate and pained cries as she realizes that her love has died. And Kate Winslet perfectly captures the pain and confusion of such a tragic event.
Come back. Come back. Come back.
Number 7.
Yeah, that was definitely an emotional one. And when you're making a movie about the Titanic and everybody knows the ending, so to speak, they know that the ship sinks. you have to find some other way to grip people with the story. And so you get them to connect with this character who loves life and has not a care in the world and is just living free and has everything ahead of him, and he's young, and they fall in love, and they're looking forward to a life together, and boom, you rip that out from under them. But then you also still tell the story of her triumph in moving on from that and using his inspiration to have the life she might have had with him, but still living it. And so I thought it was done in a masterful way. And that's one of those movies, too, that the music does so much to draw you into the emotion. Probably one of the best movie soundtracks of all time. So good. And now we're going to get what might have been number one for me on this list. This is brutal.
7. Thomas J. Sennett, My Girl. There are very few things in life more tragic than the death of a child.
Yeah.
It hurts. It hurts so bad. Make it stop.
While searching for Veda's mood ring, Thomas kicks a bee's nest, and its occupants proceed to sting him numerous times, resulting in a fatal allergic reaction. It's not so much the death scene itself that stirs the emotions.
It's the funeral.
We don't really see anything except Thomas flailing around and his glasses falling to the ground.
Wait.
It's Veda's reaction that really tugs at the heartstrings, and Anna Klumsky sells her pain with acting skills far beyond her age. That scene in the funeral home has been indelibly ingrained in our brains since childhood, and we can't help but get emotional every time we think about it.
Put his glasses on.
Can't see without
Put on his glasses. He was going to be an acrobat.
Number 6.
I don't know if it was the age I was. I'm like 2 years older than Anna Klumsky, and I had a huge crush on her as a kid when that movie came out. That, one of the all-time saddest movie scenes. And it is. It's not his death itself. It's the funeral. It's her. And her, as a kid actor, oh my gosh, she nailed that one. She hit it out of the park. Be prepared if you watch that movie. Honestly, for me, it's a coming-of-age story, and yeah, the rest of the movie is like, it's all right, and they had sequels and stuff, but that scene is that movie. I mean, there are movies like that, right, where the whole movie might, I don't want to say My Girl's forgettable, because it's a good movie, but comparatively speaking, the movie is forgettable compared to that scene, which is the one everybody remembers.
Brooks Hatlin, The Shawshank Redemption. Brooks served more as a symbol than a fully realized character. He represents the fragility of change and the inability to adapt, especially in inmates who've been locked up for decades. Brooks was imprisoned for 50 years and has incredible difficulty adjusting to the modern world and his newfound freedom.
Dear fellas, I can't believe how fast things move on the outside.
In one of the most heartbreaking montages in film history, we watch him struggle with everyday traffic, loneliness, nightmares, and his job as a grocery bagger.
My hands hurt most of the time.
Make sure your man double bags. Last time he didn't double bag and the bottom near came out.
Make sure you double bag.
His final words serve as a painful statement for battling anxieties and thoughts about taking one's own life. And it is profoundly personal for anyone who's gone through such a tragic event.
I doubt they'll kick up any fuss. Not for an old crook like me.
Number 5.
Yeah, it's a great movie. I mean, everybody knows it's a classic now. A lot of it filmed here in Northern Ohio. And Brooks it's not part of the main story, but it is an important story that gets told that people don't really think about the idea of people becoming institutionalized. You spend your whole life being told what to do and being held in a confined space, and suddenly you're let out. And 50 years, think about how much the world changed in 50 years for this guy. Let's say it was 1955. I don't remember exactly what year it is he gets out, but let's say he goes in 1905 and comes out in 1955. How different the world would be from one to the other. And you could easily see how somebody could just decide, I'm an old man. I got no use for this. I just can't handle it.
Johnny Cade, The Outsiders. S.E. Hinton's novel The Outsiders has always been praised for deftly conveying tragedy and mature themes for younger audiences.
Yeah.
Perhaps the most important aspect of the story is Johnny's redemption.
Stupid Johnny, man.
We'll do it for Johnny.
Johnny and the Greasers save a group of children from a burning church, and Johnny suffers fatal injuries. His impending death causes him to repurpose his priorities. Not only does he stop caring about the senseless gang drama, he also tells Ponyboy to stay gold.
Stay gold. Ponyboy. Stay gold.
His death allows Ponyboy to live, not to mention the children, and stay gold has remained one of the most iconic quotes in children's literature. It's clear that Johnny's lessons touched not only Ponyboy, but the entire world at large.
Boy, that talk about an all-star cast. I mean, you got Ralph Macchio playing the character that dies there. You got C. Thomas Howell playing Ponyboy. You've got Matt Dillon, Patrick Swayze, and Rob Lowe, and boy, they're just a bunch of others that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head. But it's a fantastic story. It has it all. It's set in the 1950s between kind of the preppies and the outsiders, so to speak, the guys who come from the wrong side of the tracks, the bad boys. And really, there's no difference in terms of who's bad and who's not. It's just how people are perceived. And there's so many great themes in that movie. And I think The Outsiders is one that a lot of people, I don't know if they still do, but we had to read it in middle school and watch the movie and studied a lot of that in English class. A lot of those themes. Really, really good.
Number 4, Bruno and Shmuel, the boy in the striped pajamas. Movies don't get much darker than this. It tells the story of Bruno and Shmuel, two young boys who are caught in the midst of the Holocaust. Bruno is a young German who's indoctrinated with anti-Semitic propaganda, yet he befriends the imprisoned Shmuel.
Are you not allowed out? Why? What have you done? I'm a Jew.
One day, Bruno decides to help Shmuel find his missing father, but the two are ferried into a gas chamber.
It's alright. I think we're just waiting in here until the rain stops.
Close off!
The Holocaust is undoubtedly one of the most tragic events in human history, and by telling the story through the perspective of two children, it allows viewers a more personal glimpse into its utter depravity. This movie perfectly highlights the duality of humanity, its empathy and senseless wickedness, which makes for some truly unforgettable viewing.
We're not supposed to be friends, you and me. We're meant to be enemies.
Number 3.
Yeah, so there are some movies that everybody needs to see, but once you see it, you never want to watch it again. I mean, Schindler's List is one of them. The Boy in the Striped Pajamas is one of them. It's hard in a world that is so desensitized to violence, and when you can get desensitized to numbers like the millions we're talking about that were gassed or otherwise killed in the Holocaust, and it wasn't just 6 million Jews, it was millions and millions of other people as well. When we hear those numbers, they can start to become meaningless because they're just statistics. And so what's powerful about that story is the way that, you expect the Jewish kid's going to die. You understand that going in. It's the Holocaust. He's a Jew in a concentration camp. He's going to die. The way they unexpectedly throw in the death of the German kid because he happens to go in at the wrong time and wears the pajamas and looks like a Jew, and so he gets killed. That's what gives you the gut punch. Not because his life is more valuable than the others, but because of the unexpectedness and the cruel randomness of it. The utter senselessness and the wrong place, wrong time sort of quality to it. That's what gives you the emotional gut punch in that one, and it's very effective in that. I think it does a great job.
3. Tony Stark, Iron Man, Avengers Endgame.
Yeah.
Well, we all knew it was coming, but it still hurt. Much like Logan's death, Iron Man's serves as a thematic statement regarding the history of superhero films in the 21st century, perhaps even more so.
You won, Mr. Stark. You won it. You did it, sir. You did it.
The Marvel Cinematic Universe began with Robert Downey Jr.'s endlessly charismatic Tony Stark, and Phase 3 ended with his sacrificial demise.
I am Iron Man.
Iron Man.
The death is certainly sad from a pure storytelling perspective, but it's also sorrowful for what it represents, the symbolic end of what we've come to know as the MCU. Sure, we still have about 1 billion movies to go, but nothing will recapture the cinematic magic of watching the MCU develop throughout the 2010s.
I'm hoping if you play this back, it's in celebration.
Number 2.
So yeah, for that one, like I said earlier, it's harder for me to connect to superhero deaths in movies just because of the fantasy nature of it. But that one, there's an emotional quality of it for me, and I think in part because they do such a great job of humanizing it, especially the scene with Pepper, because she comes down there and she says, "It's okay, you can go." And how many of us have said those words to a loved one and then watched them go right in that moment? And so there's an emotion there because there's a relatability to it, I think, that makes it powerful.
2. Jenny Curran, Forrest Gump. Despite all his accomplishments and all that he saw, Forrest always returned to Jenny. Forrest was no stranger to death, having seen both his mother and Bubba pass away. But it's Jenny's death that truly made an impact, both on Forrest and the viewer.
I wish I could have been there with you.
You were.
You were.
While we don't see Jenny's actual death, the final moments between her and Forrest are gorgeous, and the montage where Forrest talks to her grave is one of the saddest yet most uplifting montages in film.
And every night we read a book. You're so smart, Jenny. You'd be so proud of him. I am.
Tom Hanks is simply spellbinding, selling every last bit of Forrest's sadness and loneliness, but also his penchant for bravery. Like Forrest says, dying is just a part of life. We just wish it weren't.
And to me, one of the other most emotional scenes in that movie is the one where Forrest it's earlier in the film, he takes Jenny back to the house she grew up in where she was severely abused by her father. And she just starts grabbing rocks and throwing them at the house. And she finally just collapses. And Forrest says, "Sometimes there just aren't enough rocks." And anyone who has experienced any kind of trauma in your life knows what that's like. Yeah, that's powerful, though. And that's another one of those stories where the whole movie is about him finally winning Jenny. And he finally gets her and they get married and they have a child together. And then he loses her to this as yet unknown disease, which is implied to be AIDS.
Always said dying was a part of life. I sure wish it was.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel
What
and
could be
ring the
number
bell to
one?
get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. Number 1, John Coffey, The Green Mile. There's just something about Stephen King's old-timey prison stories that really gets the waterworks going. The death of the innocent, childlike, and literally magical John Coffey is one of cinema's saddest moments. So many aspects of the scene are downright tear-inducing, including the crying officers, the swelling music, the dramatic sparks, and of course, the iconic line,
"Please, both. Don't put that thing over my face. Don't put me in the dark. I was afraid of the dark."
John Coffey is the very personification of love and kindness. And while he recognizes humanity's cruelness and penchant for sin, he decides to die as a scapegoat.
Jesus Christ.
That's how it
JC.
is every day, all over the world.
Sound familiar? The biblical allusions allow the story to permeate more effectively, all but ensuring that we never forget the sacrifice of poor John Coffey. Did you
Fantastic movie. Honestly, everybody knows Stephen King for his horror movies, but his best stuff is the dramatic stuff. Stand By Me, The Shawshank Redemption, The Green Mile. These are fantastic stories. They really are. They're really, really good stuff. And I don't know if John Coffey to me is not number one, and there are a lot of other ones in there that didn't get mentioned that I think probably should be, and I can't think of any off the top of my head, but let me know in the comment section below what would be in your top 20 that wasn't mentioned as far as saddest or like movie deaths that still hurt. And again, like I said, if you have other suggestions of reactions you'd like me to do on this channel that aren't history related, let me know and I'll try to do those. Thanks for watching.